Since we are late, we will go right into into public forum. There is no, normally when we do this in person, there is a table with a system on the table. We don't have that this evening. So we're going to use a timer that'll be available online in front of us on the screen. The timer will be set for 2 minutes, and you'll be able to see that timer right in front of you. We would just simply ask that when your 2 minutes is up, that you would please stop speaking. If you're in the middle of a sentence, of course, please complete the sentence, but we would appreciate it if you would respect the time limit in order that everyone has the same amount of time and we keep the public forum moving on. There is a hybrid system for public forum, and there is at least one person who has filled in the online form to speak during public forum. The way that we will do this is that we do have a couple of people in person that wish to speak, both of them. One of them is a Burlington resident, one is not. The way that we do this is priority is given to Burlington residents. We will have Burlington residents that are with us in person speak first, then we will go to the online Burlington residents that have submitted a form online. We will go back to non-Burlington residents who are here with us in person, and then back to the online Burlington residents. The only other thing that we do ask is that during the public forum, it's imperative that we all be mindful of using respectful language. Please direct your comments to me as the chair and not to anyone else at this table. And please remember that we're interested in your perspective on policy, on city events and concerns that you have. Please do not personalize your comments. And please remember that there are families and children who watch this meeting as their commitment to civic engagement. And please do not use profanity in your remarks. Again, we want to hear what you have to say, and it's a lot easier for us to listen intently if you speak respectfully and with decorum. With that said, there is one person from the public, a Burlington resident. I believe there's only two, is that correct? And that would be Todd LaCroix. The table for speaking at public forum is in front of us. If you could make your way over here, we'd appreciate it. Thanks very much. Yes, please.
I'm sure you're happy I'm sober this time. Mr. Mira Weinberger, you're there through the camera, huh?
Todd, Mr. LaCroix, hi. If you can just respond to it, direct your comments to me.
Yeah, no, I was just looking to make sure
Yes,
that
yes.
like we're all here. Yeah, oh, it's already begun. All right. Well, you know, I remember 10 years ago, Mayor Weinberger sitting at Muddy Waters with a elite Democrat, and he was bragging about how nice it was to be in charge. Well, 10 years later, there's a big hole in the middle of Burlington, and I'm finding that there's a bigger hole in your hearts and your souls right now. And I think that the two of them are very representative of what's happening here. You have lost everything that was meant to be the future for our children in some sort of grand scheme to reshape things, but you've just left a mess. And right now, you're trying to celebrate this and get it voted as one of the best public squares. Yeah, it's great if you want to get harassed by military people that are vets that are under threat from a system that's not taking care of them. It's a good place to come if you want to get harassed by sorority girls and dehumanized by frat boys. It's a great place to come to be reminded that you don't matter unless you're wealthy. It's a great place to come to be dehumanized. It's a great place to come to be reminded that you're not human to everybody.
Thanks so much for those comments. There's only one other person that we have who's here. So the other person, I believe that there is one person online. And I'll leave that to you, Sarah.
I'm looking for Dale Tillotson. I'm not seeing his name on Zoom.
You're not seeing him online. I don't have that, so I can't look with you. Is there anyone else who can look? Catherine, do you have? So we're looking for Dale Tillotson. Dale, if you are online and you want to use the raise hand function so we can possibly identify you. No? No? Okay. If right by chance you should see a raise hand, you'll let us know. So we go back to in person. There is one person who is not a Burlington resident who is here to speak, and that's Eric Hanley.
Hi there, everybody, and welcome new counselors, the old counselors that see me talk about the short-term rentals. It's been 2.5 years working on this, and I hope we're close to the finish line on this. You know, the planning and zoning, Scott and Megan worked hard. We've all worked hard. You guys have worked hard on this, and the latest thing I saw today with the email does include the inclusionary zoning, which is just like a Section 8 voucher if you have a duplex and you don't live there. And, you know, and that's my case and many other cases. You know, short-term rentals are a big part of a lot of cities right now. And I know it's only 1% of the housing market right now in Burlington. And I know there's a housing crisis in Burlington too, but I don't think picking on the short-term rentals is, you know, going to solve the housing problem. You know, there are a lot of good projects right now in Burlington, you know, and I've said this before. Doug Netty's got 99 units going up over on the Champlain Bank. Eric Farrell's got all those buildings going up over in Old St. Joseph's over there. You know, he's got almost 900 units going up there too. So I just hope we can push this along. And I know there's a June 1 deadline. And I just, you know, short-term rentals bring a lot of money into the city too. You know, tax-wise, meals and room tax. 2019 Airbnb sent a check to Burlington for $123,000. And I know they've been in touch with Monroe's office and stuff. You know, if you don't have the inclusionary zoning in the Section 8, you know, it's about $1 million a year the city could lose with tourist money and stuff. And, you know, it gets people in town, less traffic too. You know, we just lost some parking spaces in Burlington too. You know, it's an affordable way for people to go to graduations, marathon, you know, 4th of July. There's a lot of great events in Burlington. Burlington's a great city to come visit. So I want to keep it that way. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Eric. Did we find by any chance Dale Tillotson? No one raised their hand. Was there anyone else that was added to the public forum through the spreadsheet? No. Okay, so with that said, and I believe there is no one else from okay. So we will close the public forum at 7:54 and move on to the next item on our agenda, which is the climate emergency reports. Just because this is the first meeting of the new year and for the community, for those that are watching, but also for the new city councilors. This agenda item was added about 2 years ago in a resolution that was led by Councilor Hanson, recognizing the climate emergency and the city's commitment to net zero 2030 roadmap. This is a time where we bring forward any news stories that we've heard, any studies, observations, information sharing on the climate emergency. And these items can be local, national, global. The one thing they are not is an opportunity for a back and forth dialogue, but more for us to educate one another and our community on the importance and the urgency of the climate emergency. So with that said, are there any counselors or the administration who would like to offer any climate emergency reports? Does not, oh, yes. Mayor?
Thank you, President Paul. I just thought I would share in this segment that an aspect of the climate emergency has been really brought to the front to focus related to the war in Ukraine and the rising gas prices. This is yet another reason for Burlingtonians to think about the options that they have in this city to meet our environmental goals, but also help their wallets. We have now posted on charging stations in the city the equivalent of what people recharging their cars are paying in terms of dollars per gallon. And right now, at a time when Vermonters are paying over $4 a gallon at the gas pump, Burlington Electric, Burlington customers who recharge in Burlington with Burlington Electric's 100% renewable power. If you go to our charging stations, you're paying around $1.70 a gallon equivalent. And if you are taking advantage of our off-peak charging rates as a resident in Burlington and charging during off-peak hours, the cost is more like 65 cents a gallon. So at a time, just wanted to share that at a time when gas prices are so much on folks' mind. We have, over the last 2 weeks, since the last time we met, we've had 2 town meetings, Zoom town meetings that are now posted, I believe, on Channel 17 and on the mayor's webpage that go further. Really had 2 outstanding national experts on electrification and other elements of the climate emergency. And I just wanted to mention that again for anyone who missed it but wants to try to catch up on them. You can find those resources there.
Great, thank you, Mayor Weinberger. Anyone else have anything else they'd like to add? Just want to let all of you know that on the April 25th agenda, Burlington Electric has already reached out to me to do an update on the net zero energy roadmap. They have some significant, are making some significant progress and want to be able to share that with all of us. So that will be on the agenda for our next council meeting. With that, we will move on to the consent agenda. And if there could be a motion to adopt the consent agenda and take the actions indicated, that would be great. Thanks, Councillor Shannon. Motion made by Councillor Shannon, seconded by Councillor Bergman. All those in favor of adopting the consent agenda, please say aye. Aye. And opposed? So thank you very much. That brings us to the next item, which is our deliberative agenda. We do have.
When we adopted the agenda, we had, and I may just need a clarification if this is my view of it, but we had made the resolution in support of the Vermont House of Representatives adjusting the student waste. That was supposed to be 6.005 to go to
Joan, it is, it's just because of the number.
It's because you couldn't put it there.
Yeah, but
Okay.
I put that notation.
I just wanted to make sure that the council was all on the same page.
Yes, it says 6.06.
Right.
Because that was the
But
only
we'll
way
be
that we
going to
kicked it
that
on.
next.
But we will be going to
Okay.
that next.
Thank you.
And then the only other thing I just wanted to mention on the consent agenda, just so people are, just to highlight it simply, is that item 5.14 is the standing committee assignments for the next year. So that will be posted or has been posted already because Lori is so efficient. Onto the website. So yes, Councillor Shannon, we will start the deliberative agenda with item 6.005, which is a resolution in support of the Vermont House of Representatives adjusting student weights and shortening transition period to equitable funding. Councillor Shannon.
Thank you. I move to waive the reading and adopt the resolution and ask for the floor back after a second.
Okay, motion has been made and that would be seconded by Counselor McGee. Counselor Shannon, you have the floor.
Thank you. So this is something that the council has addressed a couple times before. There was a study done back in 2019 that identified the fact that the per pupil weights that the state uses to determine funding for each school district was not originally done in a very professional way when Act 60 was created. And so for the first time, they did a professional and scientific study of these weights. And that fleshed out what I think a lot of us who have participated in the Burlington school system for a long time we have kind of felt like, why does it feel like we are so underfunded as compared with some of our neighboring districts? And it's because these weights were not calculated appropriately in terms of what the cost of education for different types of students actually is. And the study offered new weights. And it's within those weights is really where the equity lies. This is, of course, a painful process at the state level. It's a difficult issue for legislators who represent both districts that are underfunded and districts that are overfunded. And overfunded, when we're talking about school districts, is I think kind of an oxymoron, like who is overfunded? But it's all, of course, relative. And we constitutionally owe all of our students an equitable education, which they are not currently getting. There was a task force that went through the summer that studied this issue. It went to the Senate. The Senate came back with a proposal that corrected the student weights and did it over a 5-year transition period. I would argue that when we have waited decades for equity and we're now asking to wait longer, it doesn't sit well with me. And I would argue that that time frame should be 3 years or less, which is in this resolution. And that, I support the rest of the Senate proposal. But when it reached the House, there's another proposal that's coming forward. And that proposal would, it really kind of makes things more complicated. It moves away from the student weighting process. It brings in this cost equity approach. The cost equity approach would require annual adjustments. And those that I've, many people who've looked at this don't feel that this is really the way to attain equity. So I have been talking with some folks on the school board as well as the coalition of school districts that's been working on this. And that coalition is a coalition of school districts across the state, because Burlington's not alone. Actually, rural districts are impacted in similar ways, which is very interesting. Winooski is also impacted. And it's an impact both to our students and our taxpayers. We are paying way more to get less in Burlington. I did ask school board member Kendra Sowers to come to the meeting. Hi, Kendra. And President Paul, if you saw it fit, I would love to. Kendra is, living and breathing this more than any of us here at this table, and I think can probably add some light to it. That's okay.
Sure. Kendra, welcome.
Great. Thank you so much, Joan. And I really appreciate you all considering this resolution tonight. It is a super important topic for Burlington, Winooski, and and school districts all over Vermont. As Joan said, it's really been over 20 years that districts across our state haven't been receiving their fair share of dollars from the state education fund. And the formula to distribute the funds uses weights, and the weights a cost for differences for students that require additional resources. So students living in poverty, English language learners, small rural schools. These weights were originally not mathematically derived, and they were implemented when they were implemented, and they haven't been updated in so long, and we know how costs change year in and year out. So as Joan mentioned, when the legislature commissioned a study, they did it in 2019. They received a pupil weighting factors report that was done by UVM and Rutgers University. And this report was really a clear, data-driven roadmap for how to update the weights based on current educational costs and educational policy. So fast forward to where we are, and Joan has talked about it. The Senate passed S287, which is really reflective of the recommendations of the pupil weighting factors report. And it uses updated weights to distribute the funds equitably across the state. So it would really ensure that our most vulnerable students have the resources they need to have the same educational opportunities as their peers. It also allows local control and decision-making, and uses a system that we on the ground, superintendents, business managers, school boards, we know how to use it. The House proposal, on the other hand, with the cost equity or the reverse foundation formula, it uses fixed dollar grants rather than weights for specific categories of students. So those grants are just an average that are taken from budgets such as ours, which isn't correct because we've been underfunded for over 25 years. And it doesn't differentiate costs across the state. So it also treats EL students with categorical grants that are really limited and have very specific uses. So the dollar amounts of these grants need to be decided every year, and they're based on kind of the political whim of the current legislature. So the weights are the way to go, and we really hope you will unanimously support this resolution, as it will send a strong message of unity from the Burlington School Board and the Burlington City Council that we fully support the passage of S287. Our students in Burlington and across the entire state deserve this education funding system that equitably serves all the learners. So thank you for your consideration.
Thanks so much, Kendra. Councilor Sheena, would you like to throw back?
Just to briefly say, I really think that the difference here is we can address this problem systemically and for the long term, or we can kind of address it in a way today, but it's going to need constant. It's going to be a battle every year from here out, and we, many of us who've been working on this really wanted to send a message to our reps saying, we really need this solution. An alternative solution is not okay. So I appreciate all of you who, on very short notice have stepped up to co-sponsor. I would like to note that Councilor Bergman also was added as a co-sponsor, and if it's okay, I will assume that I had introduced it with Councilor Bergman's co-sponsorship on there in addition to everybody else. Thank you.
That will be duly noted. Thank you. Thanks, Councilor Shannon, for all the work that you did on this resolution. The floor is open for other comments or debate on this from the council. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to this resolution? Well, since there is no one who wishes to speak to this, then we'll go to a vote. And I think we can, I'm sorry. Mayor Weinberger, please go ahead. Sorry, I wasn't looking in front of me.
No problem. Thank you, President Paul. I just want to say very quickly, I really appreciate the council taking this action. I've testified in Montpelier, I believe 3 times now, urging them to take action to fix the waiting study. So I fix the system consistent with the waiting study. So I fully support the council action tonight. We'll be happy to sign this resolution immediately and keep working with our school district leaders and legislators to try to see progress on this in Montpelier.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Weinberger. Seeing no other comments, we'll go to a vote. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion, the resolution, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you again, Councilor Shannon. And we will move on to our next item, which is 6.01. So we're back to the top of our deliberative agenda, which is a communication from Corey Mims, Senior Public Works Engineer, Norm Baldwin, Assistant Director and City Engineer, regarding the Champlain Parkway project, which is an update and schedule, as well as DPW Director Jacob Spencer. The DPW team told me in advance that they needed about 10 minutes to give a presentation, and then we'll have time for questions and comments from the council. So welcome, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, President Paul.
If I could request ability to share my screen.
That would be great, as Senior Engineer Mims has the presentation for us tonight. So thank you for allowing us to be here this evening to provide an update for you all on the Champlain Parkway project, and specifically our process with bidding the initial construction phase of the project. Our intent, to cut to the chase at the end of the presentation, is we plan to return to the council next meeting to seek authorization for awarding the initial construction phase of the project. All right, so I will provide a brief overview of where we are with the project, and then City Engineer Norm Baldwin will talk about the bidding that we have recently undergone. So next. Or you can advance. Thank you. Great. So the south end here, I'm going to minimize if that's friendly for folks. There we go. We have advanced the Champlain Parkway project in this last year as part of a larger South End construction coordination plan effort. And the goal here is to bring tens of millions of dollars of reinvestment in our transportation systems in the South End of Burlington in a way that minimizes impact on the community. And this has been done with our state and federal partners. We have what we believe is a pragmatic path to complete this work with a modest, reduced level of impact. Next. So this is the construction coordination plan that you've seen in the past. This has been last updated in March last month, in part to add an extra year on the city's Class 1 paving, the second green line here, that will extend a second year into 2023. And you'll see the Champlain Parkway project listed in salmon here has an initial construction phase in the middle of the document, and then a second and final phase at the bottom. So the initial phase here that we're talking about is the phase that we're proposing to award a contract, and it would go between Home Avenue and Kilburn. And to show that graphically, Corey, if you could click next. You will see here in blue from Home Avenue to Kilburn Street, in blue, the proposed initial contract. It would happen in the next 2 to 3 years. And then in red, the final contract that would happen starting in 2025 to 2027. So basically, you can go to the next, thank you. And this plan, as you'll see here, achieves many benefits. One is, as I said, if we manage how all the projects are constructed, the interstate connection with the Parkway would be completed once the other South End projects were completed as well. It also delivers many of the Parkway benefits promptly in terms of stormwater and bike pedestrian infrastructure, and we'll hit that in the next slide. And as I said, it makes the interstate connection when we're ready. By doing it in 2 construction contracts, the City Council ultimately has the control so that you can authorize the first construction contract, see how the other projects are proceeding, and then ultimately it's your choice when you authorize the second construction contract. And this plan, we believe, is the pragmatic way to bring the Parkway, the longstanding project, to construction. Next. So I won't read through this. This is many of the attributes of the Champlain Parkway project. While this project is not perfect, it is a good project. And I have been clear that one of the reasons our department fought for the 2016 Future Flexibility Letter from V-Trans is to make sure that as the needs change of the city, that we are not locked in with this design, and it can evolve over time with separate projects. So the city does have that letter in hand and will be a key instrument going forward. Next. We also discussed with you all in September last year that we had heard from our partners at V-Trans and Federal Highway that they expected the city to continue to deliver on this project and to bring it to completion. There are provisions, payback provisions in our cooperative agreement, which is our agreement with the state, and federal requirements that put us in a position that if we were not to deliver on this project, that we could be in a position to repay past expenses for the project, which, as you'll see in the underlined area, is somewhere in the range of over $45 million. This includes the expenses incurred before the city managed the project starting in 1998 and the expenses incurred with the city managing the project from 1998 on. Next. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to City Engineer Norm Baldwin to talk about a recent bid process.
Yeah, so thank you, Chapin. So I guess I'd start by saying that this project of this complexity and size, it requires a really robust bid process. When I say a robust bid process, it involves reaching out to as many contractors within the area that potentially could be candidates for this project to at least make them aware of the bid opportunity that this project presents. So we had done that, and we had communicated both with what we know as a list of contractors, but also the state. So this process started back in the 2nd of February, where we actually advertised the bid. And then from that, there was a mandatory bid where contractors are required to attend to be able to bid on this project. At that mandatory bid, we had 7 attendees. We had 3 suppliers and 4 contractors. Of those 4 contractors, we had ECI, Kabricki, STR, and Kingsbury. There was basically a 6-week period for people to ask questions, to respond to, and us to respond to those questions with deadlines. And then the bid was opened as a result of all those communications and conversations on the 18th, which, as you see here, there's distinct difference in price between what the engineer's estimate was and the bid itself. So the engineer's estimate, though, I think may be slightly dated in time in terms of dollar value. There was a bid analysis that so 26 million versus 40 million, and the difference of $14 million. So just to frame the context of the city's obligation against the state and federal dollars, this is a 95% federal project, 3% state, and then 2% local match. Worth noting that there are items that were non-participating. So you have what is the 2% local match and the non-participating. Much of the non-participating was identified as largely dealing with soils management. There were some value adds in terms of the fits and finishes of this project that were eligible, but were worthy of the effort and money spent. So you can see here the local match originally was budgeted at 482,000. This revised amount is 977,000, making a difference of 494,000. It's anticipated that the local match would, well, at least originally was anticipated to come out of street capital as a local match obligation, and then the non-participating would be coming from the general fund bond money itself. You can see there's been an increase of the bond requirement of $1 million. This is over that first 3-year period over this first phase. There will be a second phase at a later date, which is speculative as to exactly what those costs would be. So at this stage, we're not presenting those numbers, but it's within the range of, I think, $1 million for local match. So what's driving these bid pricing factors? Obviously, energy is a big part of any business, both for suppliers and also equipment and operation of equipment. There's supply chain issues when you're having material sent to the site. Can you get the material? Can you make this project happen? There is a competing interest with other projects. So because there's federal infrastructure dollars out there in the world, there is only so many contractors out there that can push that work out. And unfortunately, I think there's also a backlog within much of the construction industry because of COVID that have really put us in a difficult circumstance. We really do not believe that rebidding this work or breaking out this work will actually result in any sort of savings on both either the state, federal, or city itself, given that long backlog that will present itself for years to come. We've not only seen this in this bid, but we've seen it in other bids. One of the specific challenges of the Parkway is because it's such a large project spread over time, contractors, I believe, are covering their risks by setting such a higher price than you would anticipate normally. So there's a lot of challenges here with so-called perfect storm of what this is driving these costs. So you'll see here that the timeline of September 13th was our contract amendment. I'm not sure, South End coordination. Okay. As I noted, February 3rd was the bid was advertised, 18th the bid was open. We're here today to present the bid and bid status. And then we are, because of the costs that go with this project, it requires a tip amendment. So we are in conversation with CCRPC, and we have sought to at least alert them to this potential tip amendment. It's not clear whether that tip amendment will require impacting other communities, or if the state and federal government will potentially throw more money into the local tip. Hopefully we'll have more information as we move further down our schedule, post the CCRPC and also conversations with the state. But we are looking to go back to council on the 25th, seeking your support for this award of this contract. My sense is that this award of the contract from council we're seeking would have to be conditionally, because obviously we need to work through how the project would be financed and funded through the CCRPC. Our goal in the end is, once we get through this process, is to hopefully be in construction in the middle of June, which is consistent with our schedule prior to this bid. And that's, I think, all I have, and happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions from councilors? We're not going to be taking any action tonight, but this is a great opportunity to ask questions. So Councilor Bergman, please go ahead.
Thank you. So could you go back to the chart, the matrix that has the construction dates? I can get that clear. It's probably the second. There you go.
Yep.
No, actually, let's go back to the map. I think that might be. Yeah, there we go.
Great.
So to be clear, what we're talking about being asked to approve on the 25th is what's blue.
Correct.
So my concern on this entire project is going to be its impact on Maple Street and that neighborhood. So I'm looking at this and need to understand what the impact of this will be on that neighborhood as it's being built, as this and when it's completed, and how this is intended to fit so that the equity issues that everybody has heard about are resolved favorably to the people that live in that neighborhood.
Great. Thank you, Councilor Bergman. It was the public feedback during our environmental justice review and other forums that really led us to work hard to figure out how to coordinate this project with all the other projects in the South End. With implementing phase one, as you're seeing here in blue, without the interstate connection, our technical experts are saying there's no additional input for vehicles into the city than what exists today. So that phase one is really rebalancing existing traffic, not bringing additional traffic into this part of the city. As a result, we do not project any substantive change in traffic under phase one. Once phase two is completed with the interstate connection, that is when there is a projected increase along the northern part of the Champlain Parkway. With all the other projects that are proposed, the net impact on the King and Maple neighborhood is expected to decrease because there are additional accommodations. One of those being the Rail Yard Enterprise project, which will connect Pine Street to Battery Street, according to the purpose and need. So together, all the suite of South End projects really work as a united whole to build an integrated transportation system.
And the last piece of this is just to understand those traffic studies or what your analysis is. I cannot remember having visited the website a few times. I don't quite recall. Are they, is it posted there? And if not, it would be, I think, particularly important that that information be shared and widely disseminated.
Great. The traffic analyses for what happens with the Rail Yard Enterprise project are indeed fleshed out in the scoping reports for the Rail Yard Enterprise project. We're happy to reference those on the Champlain Parkway website. The challenge is ultimately we need to be explicit that all the projects listed in the South End construction coordination plan are their own separate projects.
I think, and then I'll be done, that to say that what I heard was that no traffic impact by the construction of the blue that you were reflecting on that's what you're.
That is what our traffic engineers for our project have indicated, yes.
And and my request is that be publicly available as kind of as detailed as possible, as simple as possible. So when a person who lives on Pine Street up there between, Main and Maple wants to know, they can look at that study and then we can have that conversation. Thank you.
I would just request if City Engineer Baldwin has anything to add on the traffic front.
No, we've had that information gathered at one point in time. I can't pinpoint exactly how we shared it with the world, but it has been in the past. So, but we'll make sure that we make it widely available. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Councilor Bergman. Councilor Hanson.
So yeah, I wanted to talk about the bid. Just I find the cost alarming. I don't know if you all do as well, but just how dramatically higher it is than the estimate. So you said initially there were 4 potential contractors interested. Why do we know why 3 of them didn't submit a bid?
We don't. What we do know is that of the four, 2 went in joint venture and were the low bidder. So that was completely an SDR joint venture.
Is there any?
My sense is that probably they were committed to other projects and this was a fairly heavy lift.
Okay. Is there any ability to negotiate or once you've done the bid process?
And the federal state process doesn't allow us to do that.
Okay. So the only other alternative would be to reopen the bidding process.
Yes, but there are issues with reopening a bid. Okay. Repackaging a bid.
Can we hear a little more about that? What the challenges are with that?
So I guess some of that information I think is somewhat privileged.
I think it's fair to say that if we were to put this back out to bid, there are few contractors in this area who are capable of doing this amount of work. And if this were to be rebid, we do not have any indication that the folks who put in a bid would submit a bid again. And the city may be challenged to get bidders to the table. We did a robust outreach this time and received one joint venture. And I will be honest, Burlington is a challenging place to work for contractors. It's a busy, dense environment. We do have a lot of procurement requirements around pre-qualifications and others. We had one paving bid this year. We had one sidewalk bid, right?
Yep.
So we are struggling in this environment to get a robust bidding culture. And I think ultimately we would welcome working with the council on how can we frame our work in a way that will encourage more proposals to be submitted.
I would just frame back to the point that I said earlier is that there is a lot of work out there, and contractors either were previously committed or taking on work that was less complex scope and less of a risk, particularly for bidding something that's a 2-year construction cycle. This is a large project with a lot of material. There's a lot of risk that goes with it.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it's that all makes sense, and yeah, I feel at this point, supportive of moving forward. It's just, I guess my comment would be is, yeah, I would be open to looking at that, and it just feels like, based on the numbers that were shown, it feels like we're somewhat getting gouged in the sense of, this price is not being set by the cost of doing the work. It seems like it's more being set by the market dynamics and just the limited supply of contractors and the fact that there's only one bidder, so they can go really high with that and still get the job. So it's a tough pill to swallow that we're having to pay that premium because of those dynamics, but it doesn't seem like there's an alternative at this point. So thanks.
Thanks, Councilor Hanson. Maybe we could go and end the share screen so that Councilor Hightower wanted to speak, and now we can see Councilor Hightower. So
Great.
go ahead, Councilor Hightower.
Thanks. Yeah, and Councilor Bergman asked a lot of the questions and concerns that I had. And I think another question that I have is, I think it was Engineer Baldwin was maybe speaking to like how contractors are maybe assessing the risk in this. And I guess, sorry to go a little bit into the details, but how this contract is structured, and if it's like up to the normal 10% contingency, and then beyond that, who the risk is assigned to if this goes above expected project cost.
So the pricing is based on the contractor's held to the unit pricing based on actual unit pricing of what's been established and built. And you would assume that it's within reason of this ultimate number that would be part of that they submitted as a bid. And if there are any overages, it would be a result of increased quantities and not any sort of adjustments in unit pricing. The contractor would be obligated to continue to carry that unit pricing.
And do you want?
But sorry, to clarify, unit pricing is on the inputs or on the outputs? Is it like mile paved, or is it hours of labor?
So it's based on unit construction of different elements. So whether it be excavation and volume of excavation, linear feet of pipe installed, number of tons of asphalt placed, linear feet of curb, all of this is listed as a unit price. So they're obligated to hold that unit price for the period of construction.
Right.
Yeah, there
Okay,
is.
so it sounds, go
There-
ahead.
Yes, Counselor Hightower, you asked about contingency, and I think it would be helpful for City Engineer Baldwin to talk about the contingency that's in place in this.
Yeah, so
Budget.
So when we develop a budget like this project, we typically carry a contingency. The contingency is held by the city and the funders. And only when it's necessary would it be used when there's things that you wouldn't anticipate. So a bust in the design or quantities that the designer didn't account for and was reasonably required to complete the project, then the city and the state would agree on doing a change order. So we would make use of that contingency, but it would be only held in reserve to deal with those circumstances. Typically, it's 10% of the value of construction.
Okay, that's all helpful. And so I guess just to summarize what I heard you all say to make sure I understood, it sounds like the units that we're talking about are mostly about output. So what we have estimated is how many miles of this we need, how many pound, like
Yes.
feet of this we need. And so, great. So they're obligated to deliver that, which is part of the high cost, is because they really are taking on the risk.
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Are you all set, Counselor Hightower?
That's all from me. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Shannon. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just really want to commend this team for all the work that you've done on this project. As many people know, I came to this table vehemently opposed to the project. Councilor Bergman can attest. And it's been through your efforts showing a real openness to changes, creative thinking, problem solving, and changes that have been made both on the streetscape level as well as now really the route itself. That's won my support. I, as somebody who, like you, Chapin, will be directly impacted by this road and not particularly a fan of bringing more traffic into the south end. By not, the concern on my part certainly has always been getting the connection from the highway, because then we're asking people to take this route downtown as opposed to the other routes that they've been taking, and we have discussed things like signage that would potentially direct them different ways. And I appreciate that there was an agreement actually to at least not direct traffic down this route when it does connect with the highway. You wouldn't direct downtown traffic along this route, which honestly is not going to be a very good way to get downtown. But my concern also, like Councilor Bergman, has always been about the King and Maple neighborhood, how that affects an already F-grade intersection. And I had always asked that when we start this project, we start the project with the traffic lights that we have been told will make a big difference at that intersection, and we can't get them in advance of the project because the project has been, quote, federalized, whatever nonsensical meaning that may have. I'm sorry. And I know that now King and Maple are not part of this first phase. So I'm willing to be flexible on that long-standing request, but just wondered if you could update on the status of whether or not there might be a possibility to get the traffic lights, because the neighborhood is really the traffic jam impacts the neighborhood because people are sitting there and spewing fumes, in their houses that line this street. It's not healthy. If we can alleviate that, it would be good. Possible?
One of us should.
Yes. Yeah, so I appreciate the question. We technical staff believe that it would benefit the neighborhood to actually have those traffic signals installed. But in public conversation with the neighborhood, there was a real strong concern expressed that this was kind of the first opportunity to kind of build this thing under the darkness of night, and that they would be impacted by it. So we have faded away from the technical to serve more of the sole interests of the neighborhood, so that they feel comfort that we're not attempting to establish the next phase of this contract to construct and provide improved access to their neighborhood. So we've avoided this idea of a interim measure of installing traffic signals in this phase to avoid that sense of fear that people have. Does that make sense?
Well, is that what the neighborhood has said that they want?
That was.
Because I haven't heard that in terms of the light.
It's easily interpreted that they are concerned that this last segment, connecting segment, any effort to construct that is perceived as the next step that's beyond their control. And so we've avoided doing that.
So could we have is there any reason in terms of the project being federalized? Is there any reason we can't have the lights? And if we can have the lights, if we want them, can we start having those discussions to make sure that, you know, we have the community on board? Honestly, it would be to serve that community. That's why we should have the lights, in my opinion. If they don't want them, okay, but I haven't heard that.
I defer to the council and what they've heard, but I think we've heard pretty strongly that people feel strongly that this last segment shouldn't be built until other balanced projects are complete. And any effort beyond Kilburn Street would be perceived as an approach to make those connections, and potentially could change traffic operations. So we've avoided that.
But there isn't a reason in terms of the funding, in terms of the federal funding. That is not the reason.
No, that's not.
Okay.
That's
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Barlow.
Thank you, President Paul. I have a question about the overages. The local match were like $500,000 over, and I think people are not participating, it's like $5 million over. Where is that money going to come from?
Well, we're obviously gonna have to work through how we're gonna fund the balance that's due. As I said earlier, the 2% local match would typically come from street capital, and then the non-participating costs would be required to come from general fund bonding.
So the general fund bonding, I was looking at the memo that was circulated where they had local match for grants, and there was $4 million and then $23.8 million bond, and it's for the Parkway additional, it's $125,000.
Right. There was already an existing accrual or encumbrance within the accounts. So the only additional need in the bonding was like $300,000 to kind of fund what is known to be an estimated cost. We have this process.
And so this 500,000 would potentially come from the bond and displace other projects in the bond?
The 500,000 would, the difference in the 2% local match would potentially come from street capital. We haven't resolved how that would be funded, but typically the 2% comes from street capital, and then non-participating would come from capital.
That's our current plan. The thought is by the 25th, we'd have a specific proposal for it.
Right. But it's fair to say that we'll probably have to reprioritize some of the projects we have in the capital plan. Okay, thank you.
The $4 million of grant match was on, there were some projects that we had thoughts for, but part of that 4 million was not specifically identified. So for better or worse, this may be the project that needs to fill that slot, and we'll have more information on that for you on the 25th. But certainly there are trade-offs. If we need to expand the amount of local funds we need to put towards this project. We get $40+ million of improvements for a few million of local funds. It still is a beneficial funding formula for us, just a little less so.
it seems like, oh, the theme tonight in Board of Finance and then now with the paving projects is we're getting a lot of bad news on how much stuff is going to cost. It seems like we'll have to do some reprioritization of some of this.
Thanks, Councilor Barlow. Councilor Carpenter.
Just now curiosity, what is the timeline for the rail yard project?
Rail Yard Enterprise?
Yes.
Rail Yard Enterprise, we're on a pay schedule. By this January, October, January, somewhere between October and January, we hope to have a for selected for alternative. And we'll begin design. Very tight, won't be a long time to design and like within 1 to 1.5 years time, we'll have a design that's ready for complete construction. It's advancing. We've had a number of neighborhood meetings. We've also met with stakeholders and we have consulted on board working diligently to stick to the schedule that's listed in the South End coordination schedule. Very mindful of reports in that.
Thanks very much, Councilor Carpenter. I don't have anyone else in the queue. Is there anyone else? Yes, you may, Councilor Carpenter.
Thank you,
Go
President
ahead.
Paul. Thank you for your presentation tonight. I want to echo Councilor Shannon's comments as well. Thank you for all the work that your department's done. Clearly, we're closer than I think at any point in recent history to breaking ground on this project, and it's due to the hard work of your department and your staff. So thank you very much. I also want to commend the efforts of advocates, including the Walk Bike Council, the Pine Street Coalition, the Vermont Racial Justice Alliance, who different proposals that have put forward. I, as a neighbor of the South End, haven't always agreed with, but I do think that they've done good work to make this project more sensitive to pedestrian and cycle safety concerns, to make it more sensitive to environmental concerns, and of course, to make it more sensitive to environmental justice and racial equity concerns. And I appreciate your department's openness to working with those advocates and making this a better project. I feel like we've said for some time that it's not a perfect project, but I think it's a more perfect project than when you first started saying that. So, so thank you for your efforts. I share the concerns raised by my colleagues with respect to the cost. I think it's a concern that your department has as well. That said, I'd like to take this opportunity to implore my colleagues to do whatever they can within reason to push this project forward. This is anecdotal, but as a resident of the South End who's lived for some time at a busy intersection, and you all know this because I've, prior to my assuming the seat on the council, been before you a number of times, anecdotally witnessed a number of accidents, vehicular accidents, accidents involving pedestrians. I lived at the intersection of Home Avenue and Pine Street for some time. Never felt comfortable allowing my young kids to play in the front yard because anyone who travels down Pine Street or lives in that area can tell you there's been a significant uptick in traffic, particularly in recent years. It's in large part due to increased development in the South End, which I'm a big proponent of. I think that the Pine Street corridor has become a great place and a real destination, not only for folks locally here in Burlington, but for the state and those outside who are visiting Vermont. But it has resulted in an uptick in traffic. And when this council has considered recent projects in the South End in recent years, I'm thinking back to when this council considered zoning amendments to allow for a South End co-op on Flynn Avenue, for example, and when this council more recently considered zoning amendments to allow for a performing arts venue along Queen City Park Road. The plans put before the council have a Champlain Parkway on the bird's eye view in both those instances. And this council took action to allow for zoning amendments, all within the idea and the consideration that a Champlain Parkway was coming. And so I would implore my colleagues to, again, if the cost with it is within reason, I'll defer to my colleagues on the Board of Finance to dig into the nuts and bolts of the dollars a bit more, but if we can move forward within reason, I would implore that to happen. There are a couple specific questions that I would like to raise that have been raised by some constituents in Ward 5, and I don't necessarily expect you to have the answers tonight, but would just like to raise them publicly here. The first is that for a number of years now, since the development of the South End Co-op, Bridge Street has has been left in a state of disrepair effectively. And I understand that that's been the result of an agreement with surrounding neighbors that in building the store there, it would be left in that condition so as to avoid traffic leaving the store, going into the side streets as a means to access and leave that property. However, I think even now, we've gone a bit further than at the time we expected Brick Street would remain in that state. And so I'm curious, given that it appears that blue line there that is the first phase does include Brick Street, whether there are any plans for what to do with it. I do certainly respect and understand the concerns of neighbors still with respect to wanting to avoid traffic going on those streets, but I am curious about the extent to which Brick Street is a part of the plans. And then the other piece that I'll just raise with you is that we've heard recently from the administration with respect to potential plans and rezoning the South End for housing, that the public parcel that encompasses the barge canal may be converted into a public park. And of course, I know a number of folks on this council have heard from neighbors in the South End who are very keen in preserving that public parcel as well as surrounding parcels as open space. My understanding though is that that public parcel encompassing the barge canal is currently a right-of-way for the Champlain Parkway. And I've heard verbally through a couple of different channels that because it's identified as being in the Champlain Parkway right-of-way, that there's nothing the city can do with that parcel, including it being a park potentially, until the parkway is completed. And I guess I just would like to pose to you, I'm curious, is that the case? Because I'm looking at the timeline here and the parkway completion may not be for another 5, 6 years from now if all goes according to plan. Is the department saying that we can't do anything with that parcel until 5, 6 years from now, or what's the status of that?
Great. Both of those, I think we can start pretty quickly and then happy to defer to future conversations. Brick Street is part of phase 1. So part of phase 1 will be staying off Pine Street substantively with work because of the roundabout. And those are the two predominant routes from the south into the city center. So work, while not, we haven't selected a contractor yet. So we haven't gone through the details of means and methods, but what I can tell you is in the bid documents, it limited what the contractor could do on Pine Street this year because of the roundabout. So Brick Street is going to be as part of phase 1, and we'll let you know where it fits, but it's part of phase 1. 2, the best thing we can do to free up a lot of stuck parcels in the south end is to build the Champlain Parkway. Yes, fragments of the old right-of-way for the Champlain Parkway are kind of held hostage to the project until the project is completed. That includes the parcels you're referencing off of Pine Street, behind the Maltex building. There are other parcels as well, 339 Pine Street, which is where CSWD has their pickup and resource exists. That's a city parcel that the state paid to relocate DPW to its current 645 Pine Street location. The reuse of that parcel is held up for this project. Additionally, there are other parcels such as 195-201 Flint Avenue, which CSWD holds for a potential drop-off center, but we can't move on that until there's clarity with the parkway. There are a lot of parcels, and those are just the ones under our control. Just think about the private ones. So getting this initial phase underway will enable our partners to be more comfortable with starting conversations around what happens with these parcels once the project is complete.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Travers. Councilor Bergman,
One
go ahead.
technical
Sure.
question on the shared use paths. It looks to me that there is a gap in that off-road bike and pedestrian path between Locust and Kilburn. Am I reading this wrong?
You're reading it wrong. There's a shared use path, the entire length.
The entire length.
Pine Street on the west side from Lakeside to Kilburn. And then there's also bike facilities on street, but it's intended to accommodate people of lesser skill and ability. So
I like being wrong and getting that answer. So it is my pleasure. And I ride Pine Street. It's really dangerous to ride a bike on Pine Street.
Anything else? Nope. Okay, thanks, Councilor Bergman. So the only thing I would ask, unless there's anyone else who has any other comments, the presentation that you gave us, if you could post that to board docs.
Yes.
I think that would be great, so we all have that. My understanding is you had said that you will be coming back to us in 2 weeks. And whatever information that you do have, if you can get it to us before, doesn't mean that it just has to go on board docs. We're happy to share it with the council. I would do that, share it with the council as soon as possible. This is a very important project for sure. Thanks so much, and thank you both for your time. And I believe, I don't know if Corey's
still here.
Left us, but if he is still here, thank you as well, Corey, for being here. Yes.
There you go.
Thanks so much. I would just ask for a motion to accept the communication and place it on file.
So moved.
Thank you, Councilor Travers, and a second. Councilor Freeman, thank you. All those in favor of accepting the communication and placing it on file, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We have the communication on file. Thank you again. We will look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having us.
So we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is an ordinance, a comprehensive development ordinance, short-term rentals, ZA number 22-0A. Councilor Carpenter.
Thank you. I would like to introduce this ordinance and waive the first reading and refer to the ordinance committee with a request that the ordinance return to city council by June 1, 2020.
Would you like the floor
I
back
would like
after
the
a
floor
second?
back.
Yes, you would. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Second by Councilor Travers. The floor is yours, Councilor Carpenter.
Thank you. As is explained in the memo from Equitable, and she's here, I think, to answer any questions. Much of what is presented in this and the next resolution repeats the work that has been done previously around short-term rentals. Probably more so on the second resolution that we'll be introducing. The gut of what is being introduced and asking for review and consideration really is the amendment that was introduced at the last discussion of this, that would ask us to consider significantly narrowing short-term rentals to owner-occupied buildings, but allow owners to also short-term rent a unit that might be attached or on their property, either an ADU, a duplex, or some small unit on their property. The other component of that is a proposal that would allow a non-owner occupant to, in a 1 to 4 unit building, offer a unit at lower inclusionary zoning rents in trade for a short-term rental. And the intent of this is to encompass what we heard from a lot of input. This is not clearly as broad as what the Planning Commission Ordinance Committee had presented after their 18-month work. It was language that the Ordinance Committee and several people, current councilors, had introduced as a compromise. As you recall, at our last meeting, or the last meeting on this subject, there was presentation and a decision to very narrowly restrict short-term rentals to only owner occupants. And that was the memo that was defeated. I feel pretty strongly that this is a good compromise. It allows owners to use their property as they have been, and give them some flexibility for future investment while not opening up short-term rentals in entirety. So again, I just ask for consideration. this motion is to refer to ordinance. So I'm not here to argue all of the substance, but hope that we can get this to ordinance. And the timeline really is, I think we need to make, there's a lot packed in there around registering, collecting information, cleaning up the CDO, all of that stuff. And we spent a lot of time on this, and I hope we can focus and do this judiciously. And if you might allow Planning Director Tuttle to maybe offer comments, and in particular, kind of where we are with the status quo versus moving ahead with this.
Thank you. So in the memo that we provided with you, we offered just a couple of points about how what is introduced tonight is different from the current ordinance that's in place. I think it's really important to state, again, that there is a common misperception that we have no short-term rental rules in place today, which is not true. We have been regulating these since at least 2016. I'm looking at Scott, as either bed and breakfast or as a more traditional lodging, a hotel motel kind of use. While they're not perfect fits, they are the system that we have been using. And so the memo that we shared with you just outlines the current status of how many permits have actually been issued under that system. We have a number that are pending today. Scott and his team have definitely seen an increase in the number of folks that are coming in to seek permits under our current status quo system as this discussion has continued. So that just provides a little bit of information for you about what's actually received a permit. But I think one of the major points about how the status quo is different from what's in this package tonight really has to do with where owner-occupied short-term rentals could exist in the city. As a bed and breakfast, short-term rentals have to be owner-occupied, and there are limits in certain residential areas to the number of bedrooms that can be short-term rented. However, in mixed-use areas of the city, there's no limit on the number of bedrooms. And I think one of the challenges that we have seen and that we are seeing more frequently in the permitting that Scott and his team have been doing is that the way that those bed and breakfast terms, regulating the number of bedrooms, can be applied is that we are seeing examples of properties where more than one dwelling unit in a multi-unit property has actually been permitted as a short-term rental because they're not exceeding the bedroom limits. So that's one major way that this is different, is that in the deliberations, we've understood that it is important to limit the number of whole unit short-term rentals that could exist on a property. And this package of amendments does kind of close that loophole that exists today. The other piece is where in or I should say in mixed use zoning districts where it's conceivable that somebody could get a short-term rental permit as a hotel or motel type of use. Those do not require owner occupancy under our current standards, and also do not have limits on the number of bedrooms or units that can be used as a short-term rental. This has been more rare just because this is limited to the mixed use districts in the city in terms of how many permits have been issued under this system today. But again, it is conceivable that you could see multiple units on a property being used as short-term rentals. And certainly we do have one example at least of a duplex where both units in a non-owner occupied duplex have been permitted as short-term rentals. So these are just a couple examples of the types of scenarios that have been able to be permitted legally under the existing status quo system that have been talked about over the last several years as being the more impactful type of short-term rental uses that we hope to be able to just clean up as part of this process. Kind of all of our other policy objectives aside, I think these were some of the things that we wanted to try to limit. So just wanted to know how that package differs from what we have in place today.
Scott, did you want to offer anything?
I would just add to what Megan said. She mentioned today's standards requires owner occupancy. The flip side to that, under what's proposed, there's an allowance for tenants to short-term rent their own dwelling unit, which is not possible today, but it's pretty tightly defined.
Councilor Carpenter, what do you want to say?
For now.
Okay, thanks very much.
Wait, actually, that's one other thing. I mean, I just think, again, to remind people, the action tonight is to defer this to the ordinance committee so that I think we've had a lot of discussion. There's all of the information that are offered that would urge us to take that step.
Great, thank you. Counselor Hightower, I'm assuming you have your hand up. Yes?
Yes, I do. Thank you, President Hall. Yes, so one, as someone who was on the development review board with our city staff, they were not on the board, but obviously they staff the board. I don't think that the bed and breakfast enforcement is a good option for Burlington. Historically, we just haven't had that many cases go through the development review board just because there's been a lack of enforcement. But those cases have always been extremely difficult because it is a little bit arbitrary because we don't have a good set of rules on how to enforce it. And I would strongly discourage us from continuing to use the bed and breakfast. I think it would be very difficult on city staff and on the development review board to apply it consistently. Not least when parking and whatever else not get involved in as we're making changes to parking. And I think the biggest problem with the bed and breakfast approach is also that it doesn't give city council flexibility. Of course, once we allow a bed and breakfast, it's not the same thing as minimum housing where we can change it again the next year. That is now a permitted use that we can't just take away again. So I think it gives us far less flexibility. And also, has some of the equity issues in terms of who can, tenants can't short-term rent and so on. As one of I think I'm disappointed that we're here, that at some point we had the previous council, so different council, so I'll try not to dwell on it too long, had versions that at some point 8 people supported both versions and neither of them somehow came to pass. And I guess as a member of the ordinance committee and someone who was willing to move forward with either one of the versions that we looked at previously, I don't think it's time to go back to the drawing board. I think we spent a lot of time narrowing down what probably wouldn't work for Burlington, including caps and other things that I think really should be off the table. I think that probably something in between where the 2 versions ended up will be the best way forward. And hopefully that's something that we can make happen in ordinance, and certainly is something I would like to commit to. So I'll be supporting this going to ordinance, but also just look forward to hearing the discussion in terms of what we should make happen in ordinance that would make the rest of the council support this. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councilor Hightower. There's no one else in the queue to speak on this, if any. Oh, Councilor Shannon, please go ahead.
Thank you. I think that one of the things that wasn't mentioned as a difference between these two is that the existing ordinance is the bed and breakfast ordinance is a conditional view criteria applies to that. So when you have to apply for a permit, you have to go through the process, your neighbors get noticed, you have to meet the criteria, and then it's also an appealable decision. With this change, that changes, I believe. It's no longer a decision that requires any notice to the neighbors or any process with the city or public process, and it is not appealable. Is that correct?
I don't think minimum housing registration is appealable. I know there's recourse if minimum housing finds a deficiency and the property owner disagrees with it. I think that's a little bit different than your annual rental registration. I would point out that bed and breakfasts are conditional in the residential districts, but in the mixed use it's permitted. So we have administratively permitted some bed and breakfast short-term rentals, but the residential areas are conditional use. That's good on DRB.
Thank you. I am concerned with continued conversions of short-term rental units. I think that our lowest hanging fruit in our struggle to provide affordable housing is to save the affordable housing that we have. And while there are certain ways in which this closes some loopholes, I fear that it opens some others. And that we're not really going to have a net gain here. And there are other actions that we can take where we would do more to restrict short-term rentals. One thing that Councillor Hightower just said that I hadn't really thought about was that under the current system, if you go and apply for a permit and you're granted a permit, you have a permit. And that in the new system, because it's not a zoning ordinance, if somebody builds an ADU, registers it as a short-term rental, we can change the rule, and then after the fact, after they've built this ADU with the intention of short-term renting it, we can then say, now you can't anymore. I had not understood that as a goal of this, actually.
In the course of the discussions as a joint committee, one of the things that we talked a lot about was flexibility and concern about how permissive or restrictive the policy should be at the outset and what to do if conditions change for better or worse in the future. And one of the ideas that emerged from that process was actually to think about the bulk of the standards with regard to where someone can have a short-term rental and to what degree, having those standards live in Chapter 18 in the minimum housing ordinance so that it's part of an annual registration process. So that if and when we want to change any of the standards about where and to what degree short-term rentals can be accommodated, it would be applicable every, when the next renewal period is for rental permit or rental registration. So that was actually one of the major upsides that the committee saw to going that route. You noted the change in how permits are appealable or not, which is definitely a change in that process, but the flexibility of being able to reconsider our policies down the road and make them more or less permissive was a major upside that the committee saw to going that route. Where a zoning permit is issued one time under the rules that exist today, and someone, as long as they continue doing it, that permit is good in perpetuity.
I mean, I think just to be fair, people making investments should know that there's, what the rules are going to be for a long-term investment does need kind of a long-term commitment to know what the future holds in terms of how they're going to be allowed to operate that. So I think that that's a little bit concerning, but really I would like to see the council focus on taking actions like increasing enforcement, which the city hasn't been enforcing this, not because we can't, but because we made a decision not to, and it is enforceable under the existing rules. And I think that we should we should be enforcing the rules that are on the books. As well as, one of the things that the mayor had mentioned in his veto statement that we should be taxing conversions. And I fully agree with that. I think we should be heavily taxing conversions from long-term rental housing to short-term lodging units. And I'd rather see us spend our resources going in that direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Shannon. Scott, did you have
I just had a quick elaboration on what Megan had mentioned about flexibility, something that was repeated to us a number of times. I guess that's repetitious. Is that the same unit can be short-term and long-term over the course of a year. So if we say you get a permit to be short-term, and then you decide you want to do a long-term again, and you get a permit to do a long-term, then you decide you want to do a short-term, you get a permit to go back and forth. There are some cases right now where you can do both because all the standards line up. As far as I know, that only works for an accessory dwelling unit or maybe duplex, but beyond that, it doesn't. So it gets very clunky doing a permit every time you want to change between the two.
Counselor Carpenter.
Just a comment, it's not in the proposal, but I have discussed with Councilor Hightower, as well as I would encourage the ordinance committee to look at a fee for the units. And I think, and we'll need the city attorney to opine, that a registration fee, an enhanced registration fee is doable. It's different than a tax. A tax might require a charter change, but, and I'm just doing this out, it may be, you charge $110 now for just a regular apartment. Seems reasonable that we could charge something else for these owner occupied short-term rentals. So I would encourage the ordinance committee to look at that as well.
Thanks, Counselor Carpenter. Counselor Bergman.
I appreciate all the work that you all, not me, the other folks did on this. And actually, let me just start with that, the little minutia in terms of the use of Chapter 18 as a regulation of use, akin to licensing, maybe even, and it is not for that. I understand the desire, but I would say that a city attorney's opinion, of which I am no longer, would be appropriate in terms of using it in that fashion, because the minimum housing code is for standards. And so the way that we get there can be very tricky. But actually, I want to thank again everybody who did this work for a really long time. I didn't have to do that, and I really appreciate the fact that you had to balance owners' desire to use their property for profitably, that you had to look at the neighborhood and the impacts that are happening in the neighborhood, and this is for me, the most important thing is the impact on the housing stock. And I gotta, it is not a secret to any of us that we have got a wicked housing crisis here. And I'm hearing stories all the time about tenants who don't know where they're going to live in June. And we had in our packet tonight a resignation from a commission for that very reason. This is a live and very detrimental situation for our city. We all got, I think, an email communication on this very fact while we were sitting here. So I understand personally the desire to help owners who are trying to help pay for their own houses by turning a second unit, by creating a second unit, and then even turning it into a short-term rental, if not a rental property. That's how I afforded my house, not as a short-term rental, but as a rental property for 11 years. So I totally understand that, but I see that the more that we open this up, the more units we're going to lose. And I have a real problem with the expansion into the non-owner occupied realm. And I just can't support that personally. We're losing, if we lose housing without replacement or any payment into the housing trust fund, we're just compounding a problem that is horrific. And I don't use that as hyperbole. And the way I look at the proposal now is I think that it opens things up much too much for me to support tonight. Now, if it gets referred, I understand what the action being asked for is, and I generally appreciate the idea that you work stuff through in committee. So I hope if it is referred, that the committee will address replacement of lost housing and bolstering the housing trust fund. Councilor Shannon talked about the mayor's comment on a tax of some sort. That is not in either of the proposals. $50 registration fee that's in the minimum housing proposal? I mean, please. So it's got to reflect the work that has to go in, because there's a lot of work that's going to be entailed in doing this stuff. There's a lot of work, more than $50. That's why the minimum housing fee is not $50, because to enforce it, and you know that I know, it takes a whole lot. So if it got referred, that would be the areas that I'd be hoping that you would be really drilling down to. But I'd rather us either improve the current zoning ordinance or go back to the proposal that passed with 8 votes. I know it didn't get an 8 vote on at the veto stage, but that would be my druthers. And it's for that reason that it doesn't give me any joy in saying that at this point in time, I will be voting no.
Thank you, Councilor Bergman. Oh, I'm sorry, my apologies. Go ahead. I didn't mean to.
Thank you. No,
Okay. Councilor Hanson.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree with Councilor Bergman. I mean, we're in a housing crisis. It does not seem that it's gotten better. It seems that it's gotten worse. And it's really a tragedy that so many people, I mean, the whole time I've lived here, it's a constant flow of people in my universe, and I think throughout the city, that have to leave because they can't find housing. And when we took this issue up as part of the Housing Summit in 2019, it was very clear the intention, the predominant intention, and I think closing these loopholes is important, and I support that, we should do that, but the predominant intention of what we were tasked with was to limit conversion of housing to short-term rentals and to limit that. And to me, this goes in the opposite direction of that, where this actually expands, I think, the conversion compared to what's on the books now. So, and I think, you know, people can minimize it, and yes, it's not going to solve the housing crisis, of course, but even if it's 50 units or 100 units, that's hundreds of people that could potentially live in Burlington that you know have to leave the city or can't come into the city that want to live here. That is meaningful, and that's, in my mind, tragic. And we have the opportunity to do something about it, either by strengthening or, you know, potentially improving what's on the books and closing loopholes. But to loosen, I just think it's is a mistake, and I can't support that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilor Hanson. There's no one else in the.
Yeah, no. Please,
Councilor House, yes, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I want to echo Councilor Bergman's kind of like sentiment that I see that there's so much work that's been put into this on all sides. And having talked with many of you about this issue, I'm not hearing from anybody that they don't care about the housing crisis in Burlington. I think it's pretty, pretty clear that that's an issue in our community. And I've heard from almost every single one of you that that's an issue near and dear to your heart. So I want to acknowledge that. But I also do share, Councilor Bergman and Shannon and Hanson's concerns about the available housing stock and the impact that this has on, folks and long-term renters who want to stay in our city. And so for that reason, I will also be voting no.
Thanks, Councilor House. Councilor Travers.
Thank you, President Paul. So the question before the council this evening is whether or not to refer this resolution to the Ordinance Committee for consideration. As I say, the question for the council is not whether you support the resolution as it's been put forward, but simply whether you want to refer it to the Ordinance Committee to be reviewed in greater detail. If I'm being honest, the way the resolution has been presented tonight, if the question was whether or not we would vote in favor of it, I don't know that I would, because I think there's pieces of it that still need work. I appreciate Councilor Carpenter, for example, mentioning the idea of a registration fee. I can tell you, though, that in running for this seat, I heard multiple times from voters who were taking a keen interest in short-term rentals. This idea of short-term rentals, Airbnbs, was on the ballot on town meeting day. And as I see it, there's an expectation from the public that this new council to take this issue on. I certainly respect and echo the comments made by my colleagues here about the work that's been put into this in the past. But I think that there's still work to be done, and there's an expectation among folks in the public that we take it on. I agree there's a housing crisis. It's felt very acutely in the South End and in Ward 5. And I share Councilor Shannon's concerns and those raised by others with respect to the conversion of units from long-term into short-term rentals. My concern also, though, is that I don't think the status quo addresses that situation. In reviewing Director Tuttle's memorandum, for example, it looks like there's a number of existing and pending permits. And I think that if we do not take this issue on, that we can highly anticipate that the number of permit applications will significantly increase. And I suppose I just want to ask you the question, do you have any sense as to how many application permits you may expect? And can you speak to the department's ability and perhaps even the Development Review Board's ability to take those applications on?
The DRB has been seeing 2 or 3, even 4 short-term rental applications on every agenda for the past couple of months. And I think in large part that's been driven by it looked like the council was coming to an end of the process, but that has continued even currently. We have a number of folks coming in. It seems like anyone who can get approval under the existing standards has decided they're going to seek it rather than see what the end result of this process will be.
I think ultimately how many of them could seek a permit under the existing standards really depends on whether they're either an owner-occupied property that could fit under the bed and breakfast standards today, or in a mixed-use part of the city where owner occupancy isn't required. And we don't have enough detail on the existing, what we believe to be the existing short-term rentals in operation to know exactly how many of them would be able to fit under one of those two.
Okay. So my concern is I've certainly heard from folks who are interested in, for example, accessory dwelling units being long-term rentals or duplexes being long-term rentals. But as I understand it, based on your memo, Director Tuttle, at the moment, you can register an accessory dwelling unit as a bed and breakfast. You can register your duplex next door as a bed and breakfast. You can register units within a 3 or 4 unit building as a bed and breakfast. And as Councilor Hightower pointed out, if this council does not take action and bed and breakfast applications are submitted in duplexes, in accessory dwelling units, in 3 or 4 units going forward, those units may potentially be taken off the long-term rental market forever, because you will issue a permit for them to be a bed and breakfast. And as Councilor Hightower, I think, aptly pointed out, we won't necessarily as a council at that point in time have the opportunity to go back and change that situation. And so I strongly feel that the council needs to take another look at this. I think that whereas I agree with Councilor Bergman with respect to Chapter 18, I think that one of the benefits actually of bringing Chapter 18 into short-term rentals would be that it would apply minimum housing standards to short-term rentals. It would allow the Code Enforcement Office an opportunity to review these properties and to apply minimum housing standards, including minimum energy efficiency standards that this council recently enacted, potentially with respect to short-term rentals. Again, to sort of reiterate a comment made by Councilor Carpenter, it would also allow an opportunity for us to charge an annual fee in a way that our permitting process does not currently allow. Do you know off the top of your head, for example, where it's a permitted use, what the fee for that is currently for a bed and breakfast?
Zoning permits, $122 for permit.
Okay, $122, and a conditional use permit fee is how much? $195. Okay, and then and that's a one-time fee up front for the permit, correct? All right. And then there's one other issue that I just want to raise from an equity standpoint. You touched on it a little bit, but I think it's a really important issue. So currently, bed and breakfasts are a conditional use. I think you mentioned in low-density residential neighborhoods. Is that correct?
In all of the residential districts.
Okay. And you said it's not a conditional use in mixed-use neighborhoods. Is that right?
Correct. It's permitted.
Okay. And the zoning map is a little bit hard to read, but correct me if I'm wrong. The mixed-use neighborhoods are pretty much the Old North End, correct?
Parts of the old.
Parts of the
North,
old
so,
North.
yeah, along North Street and North Winooski Avenue are in mixed use zoning districts. The bulk of some of the residential neighborhoods in the Old North End are either residential medium or residential high density.
In those neighborhoods, however, where bed and breakfasts are currently a permitted use, neighbors would not have an opportunity to appeal that application. It's something that your office could approve administratively, correct?
Anything's appealable, but there wouldn't be a public forum the same way there is for conditional use at the DRB.
Okay, so it's only those folks who live in residential neighborhoods where it's labeled as a conditional use that would have the opportunity to go before a public hearing, go for the DRB to have their voices heard. Is that correct? Okay. I think just finally that presents an equitable issue as well. I think that folks in every neighborhood in the city should, if they have concerns about a bed and breakfast or an Airbnb, have the same opportunity to be heard with respect to that development. I don't think that exists right now. I don't think the status quo addresses fully issues with respect to conversion. I think that we have a huge opportunity here to, like, communities all around the country. You do a quick Google search: Boulder, Colorado; Ithaca, New York; Providence, Rhode Island; State College, Pennsylvania; other college towns around the country have over recent years taken this opportunity with the advent of Airbnb to address the situation. And I think that if this council doesn't take action with respect to it, that we would be abdicating our responsibility there. Or there was a council at one point in time, must have been a long time ago, who clearly felt it necessary to regulate bed and breakfast, which is why we have it in the ordinances now. We have a new form of logic now, and I think it's our responsibility to take it on. So I'll be voting to refer this committee and look forward to doing the work. Thank you, Councilor Parkway.
Thanks, Councilor Travers. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to this before we? Councilor Hightower.
Yeah, I think Councilor Travers, I don't even know how to say your last name yet. I'm sorry, I will learn. Is said it said it well, but I really do like the only, and Megan and Scott can correct me if I'm wrong, but the only reason that I remember a bed and breakfast ever being denied was because of the parking plan and the parking minimums. And was with us getting rid of parking minimums, we are opening up the bed and breakfast field wide open. And the DRB is much less likely, I think, than the city council to be conservative on who they give these permits to. And I really don't think that leaving it to the bed and breakfast ordinance is the right way to go. And to say that we're not even going to look at this again and try to get it right, I completely agree. Is us getting rid of the responsibility, just saying we're not going to touch this and just letting it happen as it is. And I really don't think that that is the right way to handle this problem.
Thanks, Councilor Hightower. We're Councilor Hanson to be followed by Councilor Shannon, and then let's try to see if we can maybe go to a vote.
Thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to respond to, I guess, both previous counselors and just say that for me, voting no isn't saying let's just stick with the status quo. I think it's clear we need to continue to work on this and get this right. That's gonna have, that we know that that's gonna be a debate and a battle, given how it's been in this council and how it's been in committee. And I feel like to start in a place that had failed 6-6 in the previous council and that many of us strongly oppose, which is this current language, I think is not the way to go. I think we should start with something that more so addresses, again, the issue of not losing more units. So that's how I feel, and I feel like if we were to defeat this today, we could start on more of that page, and still we could refer it to ordinance if we wanted to continue that work at the committee level. So I just want to say it's not this dichotomy between we either specifically advance this proposal to ordinance committee or we do nothing. I don't think those are the options before us. Thank you.
Thanks, Counselor Hanson. Counselor Shannon.
I was just going to say almost exactly what Counselor Hanson just said, so I'll leave it at, I agree with Counselor Hanson.
Okay, that's something for brevity. Thank you, Counselor Travers. To be followed by Counselor Freeman. Counselor Freeman.
Oh, so I was sort of back and forth about whether to support this. I think I agree with the points that have been made about concerns about the version that's being referred by various counselors. I think that on a process level, I probably am. I think I brought in a lot of proposals to council for referral. And I just sort of hate to, yeah, it doesn't feel good to like just watch something at that, to kill something at the referral level. I don't necessarily agree with this version. I'm glad to hear that people will continue and counselors will continue to work through. I agree that we should have a less permissive version. That is important, even though it's, you know, whatever iota of the housing stock that it all makes up this sort of mosaic of how we provide this necessary thing for people to shelter, which is unfortunately so overly commodified and so inaccessible for people, and that is greatly impacting this community. So I'm a little bit I don't really support this version. In the sense that
Thanks, Counselor Freeman. Do you want the floor back, Counselor Travers?
No, I yield to Counselor Crawford.
Okay.
Just a couple of comments. It really needs to go to ordinance. This version, in my opinion, and I'm not here to argue it, will significantly restrict what's going on now, unregulated. There's only a couple possibilities short of banning it, short-term rentals pretty much in entirety, which is what folks tried to do and what was vetoed. So I think we need an opportunity to look at some little other options. And that's all I believe this will do. And I think it should go to ordinance for that discussion.
Thanks, Counselor Carpenter. Counselor Travers. Anyone else? Okay, so just so we all understand, the motion was to waive the first reading, refer it to the ordinance committee with a request that the ordinance returns to the council by June 1 of 2022. So a yes vote is to refer it to ordinance, a no vote is not to refer it to ordinance. It appears as though it might be a good idea to do a roll call.
Counselor Barlow,
Yes.
Counselor Bergman,
No.
Counselor Carpenter,
Yes.
Counselor Freeman,
Yes.
Counselor Hanson,
No.
Counselor Hightower,
Yes.
Counselor House,
no.
Counselor McGee,
Yes.
Counselor Shannon,
No.
Counselor Travers,
Yes.
Council President Paul.
Yes.
Seven ayes, 4 nays, 1 absent.
So the motion passes and will be referred to the ordinance committee for report back and hopefully action to be taken by the 1st of June. Which leads us to the next item, which is another ordinance on Chapter 18 housing, short-term rentals. Councilor Carpenter.
Thank you. I'll leave planning director in this, but these two really go in tandem. So they need to be considered together. You can't really separate them. So again, based on all of the other discussion, I encourage us to refer this to ordinance and work through the details as we look at the substance of how we define a short-term rental.
So you're making a motion.
I'm making a motion to waive the first reading of this and refer to the ordinance committee with the request that it return to the city council by June 1.
Thank you for that motion. Is there a second to that motion? Thank you, Councilor Barlow. there anyone who would like to speak to that? Yes, Councilor Bergman.
You have to consider these together, so I will vote in favor of it. Makes no sense not to. I would hope that we can get it back by June 1st. We have a lot that is going on between now and then, as we heard earlier, and as the finance board. The word request for it back, to me, means we're requesting it, but if it cannot happen, if the work needs to happen to get this right, then I think the plain meaning of the motion is that there is no requirement. And that's the way I take it. You know, yeah. So.
Thank you, Councilor Bergman. Anyone else wishing to speak to this second ordinance that's related to the first one? Okay, with that, then why don't we go to a vote and let's just try to wing it here. All those in favor of the motion to waive the first reading and refer it to the ordinance committee with a request that the ordinance return to the city council by June 1, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Anyone opposed? Okay, vote is unanimous. So we will move on to the next item on our agenda. And I am mindful of the fact that we have a local control committee commission meeting after. We will do that after item 6.05 and before we go to committee reports. The next item is a resolution retaining fare-free public transportation and avoiding service reductions. Councilor Hanson.
To waive the reading and adopt the resolution and pass it to the board back after a second.
Motion made to waive the reading and adopt the resolution. Is there a second to that motion? Thank you, Councilor Bergman. Councilor Hanson, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I guess I would say the immediate reason for this is Green Mountain Transit, our public transit provider, right now is proposing to cut service and also to re-implement fares. That was initially approved by their board, and that, as of now, is their plan for the coming fiscal year. However, there's a huge opportunity to avoid that, and leadership at GMT has indicated their desire to avoid that, their intention to avoid that. And the transportation bill that passed the Vermont House would allow them to keep their service fare free and would allow them to keep these routes going. And I think potentially even beyond that, especially if the city got more active, maybe there's even opportunities to expand. So this is now in the Vermont Senate. They're considering it. I think it's really, really important that we weigh in on this as a council. We did weigh in a few years ago, just before COVID as a council. I believe it was unanimous where we indicated our support for fare-free transit to the state, and they actually did implement it that year. It was, I wouldn't say it was necessarily because of our resolution, although it couldn't have hurt that we weighed in, but it was mostly due to COVID and just the public safety aspect of boarding and yeah, and other factors as well. But so I think there's a lot of consensus in our community among GMT. Thanks to Commissioner Fleet for really kind of raising the alarm bell on this. But it feels like there's a lot of consensus around the need to support and expand and enhance public transit. It's both a climate emergency issue and an economic justice issue for so many. And I won't go too deep into the reasons. I guess two things I'll mention that maybe not everyone knows that speak to each of those. So on the climate front, according to the research I've seen, even a bus that's only a quarter full is still substantially lower and is running on diesel, which most are, still substantially lower emissions than people driving alone, even if it's a quarter full. And on the equity front, I think one that people don't know is just the high cost of car ownership. It's not just the expense of purchasing a vehicle, which is already out of reach for so many people, but the cost to own a vehicle is in Vermont on average is $700 a month. And we know a lot of people and families in Burlington, can't afford that. So supporting transit is really key for both of those reasons. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Is there anyone, Councillor Shannon, to be followed by Councillor Carpenter?
Thank you. I will support this because I want to support funding public transportation. But at the same time, I want to, draw people's attention to a study that was done. It was a study that I think the legislature asked to have done, report on methods to increase the use of public transit in Vermont. And what that report says is that fare-free transit does increase ridership, but it doesn't reduce the reliance on cars. Because as it is increasing ridership, it's mostly increasing ridership among people that are already riding the bus. So rather than walk some distance, they may take that bus. So it's not the fare-free aspect. There isn't evidence that it's doing a lot in terms of reduction of carbon emissions. And for anybody who's tried to use the bus system, what is quite obvious is it's extremely challenging to use our bus system because it doesn't go where you need to go when you need to go there. And as whatever dollars we spend, they are limited dollars. I would strongly urge using our public transit dollars for expansion of service, either by extending the hours of service. People who work at the hospital do not find the hours of service to be something that helps them get to work and get home from work. The same goes with getting to the airport. The buses aren't running at the hours that the planes are leaving. So I hope that there will be a little bit more focus on that, because as much as I like to get on free buses, it's not what is going to make the real difference in getting making the bus system usable for people. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Shannon. Councillor Carpenter.
I just want to comment, I've had several conversations on this. It seems more optimistic with the Senate, but we've still got a lot of work to do. It looks like the number may be more like 1.2 million, but I want to re-emphasize that 1.2 can be matched with federal dollars. We're leaving a lot of money on the table, and that just seems such a shame to me with all our transportation needs. I think the intent is to try to make state money a little more flexible so that groups like GMT can best how to figure out how to use it. And I would agree, it ought to be maintaining routes and expanding routes as best we can.
Thank you, Councillor Carpenter. Councillor Freeman.
I just wanted to add, I wanted to say that I'm supporting this, and I wanted to add that I've just been thinking about this perspective of the routes to service versus fare free, and I think that it's just a really bad framework. It's not an either or conversation. I think that when I think about transit, public transit and buses, at a bare minimum, there should be conversations like perhaps should exist that working people can use. And I'm glad you brought up the hospital, Councillor Shannon. I think healthcare, like when I see, we have early shifts at work, long-term care, it's true, people can't use the bus to get to those shifts, or if they do, it's hard, or they have to patch it together and like get a ride from a friend or family member, and that they can use, it's not ideal. But I think that doesn't exclude the conversation. For example, sort of the conversation that we're having about shifting to viewing transit as a public good and as a utility. I think that is a really valuable conversation as well. I think that it makes sense to put this forward. And I think that would be Just don't, I hope we don't need to have like I understand because when we look at it, we're saying there's a limited amount of dollars and it has to go towards something, but at some point, we are going to need an extremely comprehensive public transit system, and at some point, it is going to make sense, in my opinion, to view that as a utility, as a public good, and pay for it not at the point of service, but collectively through our tax system and our sort of shared revenue. So I will be supporting this. I understand the concern about the sort of which one, but I just think both are very important and very vital. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Freeman. Councillor Hightower?
Yeah, I will also be supporting this, and I think completely agree with what Councillor Freeman just said. And not to go on my soapbox too much, but just the vast majority of funds nationally and at the state level that are going to decarbonization are going to upper and middle class people. They're going to electrification. They're going to people who can put solar panels on their home because they own their home. And one of the few ways that we're actually supporting low income folks and their path to decarbonization is through a fair, free, and an expanded bus system. And so I absolutely agree that, just like we said before, like it shouldn't be either or. Like if anything, we should be fighting for more of the package to be going to the bus transit system, which is really especially needed by folks who have low income. And so I think keeping it fare free, and the same thing, like the fare doesn't cover the cost of the bus. So when we're making it fare free, we're really mostly helping the folks where that does make a difference, or that is really easy. Yes, it's also convenient, and it does increase ridership, but in terms of just like what chunk of the ARPA funds and the funds for electrification and the funds for decarbonization that are coming out federally and statewide that are going to low income folks, this is a big part of that, because most of it isn't going there. So I think it is important that we support this and that we fight for both fare free and for expanded routes.
Thanks, Councillor Hightower. We have Councillor Travers in the queue, to be followed by Councillor Bergman. No? Councillor Bergman, go ahead.
Yeah, just very quickly, one of the things that's been very exciting over the last 2 weeks is the engagement that councillors here have had with GMT around their service cuts, and not only with GMT, but with the House and Senate Transportation Committee. So I met for about an hour with Senator Chittenden, and it was very productive, and there were a number of good ideas that came out. So I see this as really helpful for us to continue to build the relationships that we need to build, because at the end of the day, right now, our systems are all siloed, and that is silly and counterproductive. And so I really look forward to working on the TOOC committee to see if we can pull some stuff together that is going to take what we're doing here and do that, because it makes no sense to take a bus if you can walk a place faster and easier. And that is really a situation that we've got now. So for lots of folks. And so we can do better. We will do better.
Thanks, Councillor Bergman. Councillor McGee.
I similarly to Jean, had a chance when I was in Montpelier last week to talk with Representative Cormack about this. Advocate for fair transit and expanded bus service for a long time, long before we had COVID dollars to invest in transit and fair free transit. And I think we do have partners in the state legislature that will meet us there for to advocate for this vital expansion. We're serious about bus transition, so for a while, so I don't take up plenty of time, but.
Thanks, Councillor McGee. Is there anyone else who wishes to offer any comments on this resolution before we go to a vote? Okay, with that, then we'll go to a vote. All those in favor of the motion to approve the resolution. Yes, approve the resolution, please say Yes?
Yes.
All those opposed? No? The resolution passes unanimously. Counselor Hanson, thank you so much for your work on this. The next item on our agenda is a communication from the city attorney's office regarding the annual report on the livable wage ordinance. City Attorney Richardson, were you going to speak to this or someone else?
I believe I am the designated speaker on this. This is basically a report, just as a bit of background. The city attorney's office, via ordinance changes passed by the city council in 2021, has taken over the livable wage accountability review. And to that end, we hired designated accountability monitors. They are two former Department of Labor specialists who have experience in this issue. And so we are transitioning from what used to be enforced by the Workers Center is now going to be enforced in-house through my office, and it remains priority for the city. And to that end, this report covers the activities that we've done on the livable wage, particularly since our last report. We've received no complaints. We have performed 7 record compliance checks, which were all found to be in compliance with the livable wage ordinance. Each of the companies that were checked are listed in the report, so I won't go into that detail. The big change, of course, is coming this summer with the designated accountability monitors. They've spent most of the winter revamping the forms and processes involved in livable wage accountability. And they're going to go out to the field beginning this spring as construction work begins, because this primarily covers a lot of the outdoor contractors that we contract with to ensure. And one of the areas in which we often have problems in the past with these livable wage are traffic flaggers, because they're often subcontractors that work in a variety of areas. And so interacting with those individuals to make sure that they are receiving the livable wage as required by the ordinance is important. These designated accountability monitors will be going out to work sites. They will be seeking to provide worker education on the livable wage ordinance, as well as doing spot checks at that time. They are, of course, capped to a certain number of hours per week, but then they will be doing that. We even got our checks to make sure that they'd be allowed on work sites. So that is the current living wage ordinance. I'm happy to take any questions from counselors if they should have any to this report. But I do also want to give credit to the author, Thomas Buninsky, who's really stepped up. He's technically our legal administrative assistant, but he has stepped up and really done a lot of work to make sure that these designated accountability monitors were hired, began work, and have this report for you today. So credit to Thomas on this.
Fully noted. We are very lucky and very fortunate to have Thomas working in the city. Were there any counselors? I see Counselor Hightower, and if there are others, please let me know. Counselor Hightower, please go ahead.
Yes. I feel like in my first few months as a counselor, we got a report from the Vermont Workers Center as to why they were leaving the contract. And as we onboard these folks, I just think it would be really nice to have them give some responses to the issues that the Vermont Workers Center saw and whether or not they're able to address those, because the Vermont Workers Center obviously did this for, quite a few years. And I think it would just be really valuable to start with the issues that they faced and see how we can or can't address those as we are picking up this work again. And I don't know if that report back needs to be to the full council or if that could be to the most appropriate committee, but I think that's just a really important follow-up that we have to do that we haven't done because it's been a while, 2 years, but I think it sounds like we've got the folks on board that it's now time to take that up. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Did you want to speak to that?
Sure. I mean, that obviously predates my tenure, so I'm not as familiar with the reasons why the Worker Center. But I do know that that has been, I think, part of the conversation and the revamping of this. But we'll certainly be happy to review that report with Chris and Marty, who are the new DAMs, and obviously ensure that this is a successful accountability project from the state attorney's perspective and ultimately the city's. So we'll certainly incorporate that to make sure we don't make, to the extent that there were issues in the past, that we work to resolve those issues in future and current enforcement.
Thank you. Councilor Freeman, did you want to?
Yeah, just quickly, I agree with Councilor Hightower. I think that, there were conversations about bringing in like here. And there were, I think, a number of things that the Work Center brought up, and I'm curious to see how it goes, and just want to kind of continue to stay up to date on that, and how it's going, like bringing it in. So it sounds like it's been pretty good so far, but just wanted to. I share the sentiment.
Sure.
Thanks, Councilor Freeman. Any other councilors wishing to add any comments or questions? Then I would accept a motion to waive the reading, accept the report, and place it on file. Made by Councilor Freeman, seconded by Councilor McGee. All those in favor of waiving the reading, accepting the report, placing it on file, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Will be placed on file. Thank you. That will, before we get to committee reports, we'll adjourn, we'll recess the council meeting at 10:01. 10:01. I would not say that's wishful thinking now, believe me. And go to the local control commission. And I've been thinking about this all day and trying to remember not to call anyone a counselor, but to call everyone a commissioner. So we'll see how good I am at this. So the first item on the agenda for the local control commission is a motion to adopt the agenda. Someone could make that motion.
So
Commissioner Bergman, seconded by Commissioner Freeman. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? We have an agenda. The second item is the consent agenda. A motion to adopt the consent agenda and take the actions indicated, made by Commissioner Freeman, seconded by Commissioner McGee. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? We have approved the consent agenda, which brings us to the deliberative agenda. The first item on the deliberative agenda is a first and third liquor license application for 22-23 for K&A Corporation doing business as Bangkok Bistro in the Alley, 36 Thorsen Way. I believe that the applicant is also here.
Present.
Okay. My apologies, and thank you so much for waiting with us. Is there a motion? In this case, there would be a motion to approve the first and third liquor class license for K&A Corporation doing business as Bangkok Bistro in the Alley with all standard conditions. Thank you, Commissioner Freeman, seconded by Commissioner Travers. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Aye. Thank you so much. Oh, that's correct. I forgot. Thank you. So that motion is approved. The second on our deliberative agenda is an outside consumption permit application for 22-23 for the same entity, K&A Corporation, doing business as Bangkok Bistro in the Alley. The motion would be to approve the consumption permit application for K&A Corporation doing business as Bangkok Bistro in the Alley, 36 Thorsen Way. Is there a motion on that? Thank you so much, Commissioner Freeman. Seconded by, well, I've got it down, so I'll do this one. Commissioner Travers. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. That motion passes. And with that, and without objection, we'll have a motion to adjourn. That would be at 10:05. Thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you.
We'll go back to our regular city council meeting. And pick up is on item number 7, committee reports. We're pretty early in the game for committee reports, just because we just formed committees. But if there anyone who there is anyone who has a committee report, I would love to hear it. Yes. Oh, how exciting! Councilor Hanson. We're back to Councilor now.
So the Transportation, Energy and Utilities Committee, my understanding is we'll stick with our same schedule, which is the 4th Tuesday of every month. So we'll plan to meet on the 26th at 5 p.m. unless I hear differently, and I'll let everyone know if it's different. We preferred this conversation around public transit to that meeting. I'm not sure what else is on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Councilor Hanson. Any other committee chairs or anyone who wishes to speak on a committee? Councilor Carpenter?
I have no report, just a comment that several of us had conversations about, wouldn't it be helpful to have regular committee reports? And that's easy to forget. So I'm just sort of tossing that out to Madam President and suggesting that we all think about doing a report, maybe even a paragraph in writing or something, just so we can all be reminded of what the committee's working on this month and might work on next month. And, so I'm just going to make that as a suggestion.
Thanks, Councilor Carpenter. I agree with you. I think we need to have committee chairs communicating perhaps more often, and not only on upcoming meetings, but on what is going on in that committee. So I agree with you. We'll have to come up with a process for that. If anyone has any suggestions, I'd be happy to hear them. With that, we can go to item number 8, unless there's anyone else, which would be City Council General Affairs. This is just an opportunity for any councilor to share any thoughts about anything going on in their ward, anything in the city, just general city affairs. Councilor Hightower.
Unfortunately, this is just a process. So I think I'm actually going to jump into Councilor Carpenter's comments. And I think it would be really, really helpful if we just made it a standard practice that committee chairs at the same time, like that materials are due the Thursday or Friday before, sent a paragraph, a half page, something along those lines to city staff and uploaded it with that on the committee reports. Would actually have a list of the written reports. Because I think some of us have been caught by surprise of things that are coming out of committee that we don't know are coming out of committee, because we're not doing those updates. And I think it would just be very helpful for us and for the public if we knew a little bit more about what had happened in committee, more than just when the next meetings are.
Thank you so much, Councilor Hightower. I agree with you wholeheartedly. Is there anyone else who has a comment on general city affairs? Councilor Barlow.
Yes, thank you, President Paul. I just want to let everybody know, if you don't know, tomorrow there is a public forum on the conceptual designs that the school district has come up with for the Burlington High School project. It should concern everybody because the price tags that they're floating range from $181 to $196 million. And this will obviously have impacts on everybody in the city, depending on how much we end up bonding for. So there's a public forum. They're going to be probably presenting the options that they've been talking about. And then, accepting comment. And that'll be at the downtown VHS location and also over Zoom at 6 p.m. tomorrow.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Councillor Jang.
Okay. Councillor Chang, thank you for, so glad you could join us. Please go ahead.
Yes, basically about the question raised by Councillor Carpenter in regard to the committee report. I feel like, it is important for anyone who is interested to read the minutes from the committees. And also sometimes if you have staff, to have your staff attend the committee meetings if you can't attend. I feel like the staff at the city, they do an incredible job uploading the minutes on Board Doc, and I think, or on the committee's website. I think it would be important for people to do so and not to add extra work. I believe also the second item that I wanted to talk about, the Muslims around the world, including those in the city and also in Vermont, are celebrating the month of Ramadan, which is 30 days. It started since last Sunday, and we have about 19 days to go. So to anyone who is working or have a friend or family member celebrating this month of Ramadan, there are practical things to at least wish them a happy Ramadan. And thank you so much. That's all for me.
Thank you, Councillor Jang. Councillor Travers.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the place for this, but as a parent of a student in Burlington schools, I've been acutely aware of the fact that over the last few days or so, a number of our educators have been under attack with respect to programming in our schools, Edmonds Middle School in particular, related to gender equity and inclusivity. There was a national news report on a conservative media outlet, as well as a blog post that brought national attention to this issue. And I know a number of our educators, including folks who identify with the LGBTQ+ community, have received threats of physical harm from all corners of the country. It's been incredibly disturbing. Our superintendent, Tom Flanagan, put out, I think, a great statement. I just wanted to take this opportunity as well, particularly as a parent of a student in Burlington schools, to express solidarity with our educators. I for one, am really proud. I suspect that other folks here who have had their kids go through Burlington schools are proud as well to send our kids to Burlington schools because of their commitment to equity and inclusivity, and certainly not in spite of it. So I didn't want this meeting to pass without taking that opportunity to echo Superintendent Flanagan's comment and stance in solidarity with educators who are teaching that vital program.
Thanks so much, Councillor Travers. Anyone else? General City Affairs, Councillor McGee.
I just want to note that the Ward 2-3 NPA will be in on Thursday, and there will be a follow-up presentation from CEDO staff about the shelter 5 plan for the parking lot on Parkway Ave. For those interested in attending and learning where they're at in the process.
Thank you. Is that going to be via Zoom or is that in
hybrid,
person?
In person at the Overhead Community Center and also
Bringing back the legendary dinner?
There will be pizza.
Yes.
Okay.
At 6:15.
Not for dinner, but there will be pizza.
Legendary dinners at the Ward 2-3 NPA. That's what started everybody else doing dinners. Thank you. Thanks so much. Anyone else? I just wanted to mention under item 9 for council president updates, just one thing, and that is that it's been at least 2 or 3 years. I've sort of lost track since the last time that the council had a council retreat. And I think it would be nice if we tried to do that. I will send out a doodle poll. It'll be an opportunity for us to get together, discuss council process, changes we'd like to see in our meetings, committees, and a time for us simply to gather informally and have a nice meal. And then the other thing also is, you probably saw the article that was in 7 days about redistricting. We are going to be getting moving on that, and we're going to need to do that at the next, I believe we're going to be having a work session on that at the next council meeting. So that will be on the 25th. So we've already got a few things in the queue for our next meeting. Our last item on the agenda is item number 10, that is the mayor's update. Mayor Weinberger, you have the floor.
Thank you, President Paul. And it's been exciting to have you presiding over your first meeting tonight. Congratulations again, and looking forward to the work ahead. Thank you also, Councilor Travers. I'm glad the night didn't go without noting what has been going on in the school district and the outrageous attacks from Fox commentators on what's happening here in Burlington. And I too just want to issue my support for the whole LGBTQIA community and thank the school district for taking a very strong stand supporting their educators and students. The one other thing I wanted to share tonight is, and counselors, if you haven't seen it yet, we'll see a press release from us put out late in the day. Yesterday, we lost a Burlington giant, Bill Truex Jr., who had served in many civic roles in this community for a long period of time, going all the way back to the 1960s. He founded one of the city's oldest and most respected architecture firms, Truex Collins, designed a number of significant buildings around the city. But I think what he would agree was his greatest contribution was the work he did as the visionary and advocate and champion for the creation of the Church Street Marketplace. It was very special last summer to get to celebrate the 40th anniversary of our wonderful pedestrian marketplace with Bill there and to be able to honor him. I'm so glad we were able to do that given the events of the last couple of days. I will always be personally grateful for the mentorship and the generosity and commitment that Bill showed me, staying very active over the last decade. People may remember the Public Investment Action Plan that took place after and really resulted in the whole redevelopment of the northern waterfront. Bill chaired that very extensive public engagement process that led to the city investment that made it possible for the sailing center to get built, for the skate park to get built, the new Waterworks Park, and now the Moran Frame. All of that came out of the Public Investment Action Plan that Bill played a huge leadership role in. So, Bill, thank you. We will miss you, and it was an honor getting to work with you. Karen, that's what I have for tonight.
Great, thanks so much, Mayor. That leaves us with only one agenda item, which is a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Councilor McGee, seconded by Councilor Hanson. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn, please say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We are adjourned at 10:18 p.m.